All right, so we'll get started. Today's webinar, I think, is really probably one of the most important webinars that attorneys can hear because attorneys make mistakes all the time with their careers often by going in-house, by going to the government, and making decisions that have long-term ramifications on their ability to continually make money, stay employed, and rise up in terms of the careers that they have and the money that they make and the stability of what they do. And it's something that I see on almost a daily basis. I see attorneys choosing not to go to law firms where they would have a long-term career over ones where compensation is high, but they may not have a long-term career. I see people going in-house where going in-house is a very risky proposition because your job can go away if a new CEO comes in or there's a new GC that comes in or the company merges. I mean, people make all these mistakes in their career that have long-term ramifications in terms of what happens. And so I'm going to talk about that today. Both attorneys, young and old, make these mistakes. They make them when they're in law school. They make them when they've got out of law school. And people just really mess up their careers. And I see it every day. I mean, I have candidates that will go and take jobs they think are the best job because they pay the most money, but they don't realize that they have stability there. I see people just making all sorts of short-term decisions that are very, very dangerous. So I'm going to talk about some examples today. I'll talk about quite a few of them because I want to make sure that I emphasize and you really have a good understanding of what I'm talking about. And I think the examples are kind of fun to listen to. This is a live webinar. So at the end of the webinar, we'll take a short break just for like 1 or 2 minutes, and then I will come back and answer as many questions as I have. Now, as I'm speaking, I encourage you to take notes, but I would also encourage you just to think about any questions you have that you're thinking about in your career right now that they don't have to have anything to do with a webinar. And I think questions are often the most important part of the webinars because you get to learn in a lot more detail often about other things, about what other attorneys and law students are going through. And they can really help you. I think that stick around for the questions because I think they're one of the most important things. You can ask questions in the chat as I'm talking if things occur to you that you think are important. So it's one of the things that people get distracted about in their job searches are they get distracted by salaries, they get distracted by signing bonuses, sometimes even promises of rapid advancement. But those are flashy things. What you should be thinking about in your career is something that's stable, that gives you a foundation, and that gives you the ability to consistently get work that repeats itself. So work that repeats itself is much more valuable than work that's sporadic. Right now, a lot of large law firms are very, very slow in certain practice areas like corporate. And that's a dangerous, practice area in large law firms because you could lose your job. It's not as dangerous in small to mid-sized firms. Now, there's nothing wrong with working in a large law firm, but the danger is you're not always going to get repeatable work. And you're always going to probably be asked to leave when you get senior. So is that repeatable work? Are you going to have work for a long period of time, or are you going to get laid off and fired or whatever happens or have to leave after a certain length of time? So your priority in your job and your career needs to be steady workflow, meaning consistently you're going to get work and you feel confident that you can continually get work. That's much more valuable than going someplace where you may be getting work for a certain period of time, but then it could go away. And if you prioritize steady workflow, you're going to have much greater wealth. You're going to have better security, less stress, and career satisfaction than if you gamble on short-term rewards. People take risks with their careers all the time. And those risks often have very serious, like long-term implications. So I'm going to talk about why work that repeats itself is the most valuable asset you can have in your legal career, and why choosing consistency over illusion is going to lead to much longer term success. And just as a pitch for law firms right at the beginning of this presentation, if you work in a law firm or you get experience working in a law firm and you learn about a practice area and you work in a law firm, you can work in a law firm until you're in your 80s. You can't do that in the government. You can't do that in any other profession than in the legal sphere than working in a law firm. It gives you the most repeatable work. When you have clients, it gives you the most repeatable work. It gives you a foundation that can last you for your entire life. So when I was 18, I might have been 17, I responded to an advertisement in the paper. This is back when you had to look at the paper for jobs, and there always be a 1 or 2 line description. And it was for a company saying they were looking for janitors paying $15 an hour. And right now, that would probably be double that, actually, probably $30 or $35. I don't know, but that would be a lot of money. And it was a lot of money back then. And especially for a janitor in Detroit, where there was no reason that they would have to pay somebody so much. So I felt very lucky, and I called the number on the advertisement, and the person on the other end told me to come right over. And so I drove about an hour to this place, and I was willing to drive that far because it sounded like such a great job. I pulled up into like a warehouse plaza, and parking lot next to my destination was full. There was a long line of people coming out the front door. It was just a long line of people apparently applying for this janitor job. And, some of these people were coming from, 2 hours away and were incredibly enthusiastic. I had dressed up in a tie, and because I wanted to get the job, and the line moved slowly. I went into a room, filled out an application, and it was pretty easy. I sat in the waiting room when I got in the line with about 10 people, and every few minutes someone was taken into an interview room, and it was, just kind of a weird setup. There were no signs of any business. It was just basically a warehouse with an office. Went into the interview, and there was a guy there. He was with his girlfriend, and it was, he looked like he was in his early to mid 20s, and he was at his desk, and the girlfriend was kind of sitting there like all dressed, looking good, and anyway. But so the guy introduced himself, and he said that the janitor job had been filled, but he's got something for me, and it was basically that I would be going around and selling knickknacks door to door to businesses and people, and I could make hundreds of dollars a day doing this. And he started explaining this. I didn't really understand what he was talking about. He said it was a commission job, and I was excited. And he said that I could make hundreds of dollars a day doing this, and it was pretty obvious to me, even at a young age, that I had been suckered into this. And the place was just basically like one suite in the reception room, and wasn't the kind of place that would need a janitor. So, this type of bait and switch happens to people all the time. People will believe that they can go to a firm and have a long-term career there. They may believe that they can have partnership. They may believe that there's growth opportunities, but behind the doors, there's no future. I talk to partners in firms all the time that tell me, things like the associates are expendable, that all these sorts of things, like we don't, need our associates really, we only need them to do the work. We don't need them to be partners. And many times, you realize when you get hired by a place, they may be very nice to you, but behind closed doors, you realize that it's just about billing hours. So, a lot of firms have high turnover. There's a new crop of attorney that comes in thinking there's a long-term opportunity, but many times there aren't. So the next day, I drove this awful car that they don't make anymore called the Yugo, and it was the cheapest car ever made. And I drove it through, downtown Detroit, to get there. And it was a long commute. And when I got there, everybody was ready to go. And, the guy that hired me put me with a partner, this guy, Dave. And he was, I think he was a farm, and he looked like a farmer. And then we put a couple boxes in the back of this pickup truck. And I realized that the company's offices were connected to a warehouse. And the warehouse was like stacked with all these boxes and things that, looked like they were from China. Like this guy looked like he just brought over a couple of shipping crates from China. A lot of these boxes were open, and it was cheap clothing, crappy electronics, kitchen utensils, and all this sort of stuff. And I realized pretty quickly that this was just a business. He was importing things from China that were very cheap. He was trying to get people that needed jobs, that were willing to do a janitor job. He was attracting people that were desperate for money. And then he was setting them loose with this stuff to try to sell it for a lot more money than he made, and then splitting the cost of, making the people buy this stuff from him, and they could keep some of the profits. And I think he was probably actually even charging more than the stuff probably cost quite a lot. So, attorneys, by the way, get trapped. They get trapped by titles. They get trapped by big promises of partnership. But in reality, they're just people out there that don't have a sustainable path where they're at. Sometimes they go in-house. They make all these decisions. And so, you can, in the, legal profession, instead of being forced to sell knives and stuff, you're pushing hours and, trying to often, do things along that. So, this particular guy, I guess his farm didn't work. He'd been doing this for a few weeks, and he told me that I missed a great morning because they'd done all this team building exercises. In the 1980s, at this time, there was Japan was like the envy of the world, and they would do certain exercises with their employees before work. And so he started doing that with his employees. They would do stretches and cheer and all this sort of stuff. And then he would give a pep talk and then hand out some $20 bills to the people who'd done the best the prior day. And Dave was very impressed that Jerry had given out $200 in the morning. He started talking about what a great opportunity was. And then he even showed me like a brochure that they gave out to the people selling these knives that looked like it had been written on a typewriter that said, you know, you can make over $100,000 a year selling these crappy products. And he told me he was one of the top salesmen and was really getting much better at what he was doing. And we were making $100,000 a year within 6 months. And, you know, and so attorneys, by the way, will do the same thing. They will look at profits per partner and think that that's attainable, but that it's very difficult to get that. You might go to a firm, be one of 50 summer associates. Summer associate classes are shrinking now, by the way, which is a whole separate discussion. But, you know, people will go someplace, you know, because they think all these great things will happen, signing bonuses and so forth. But then people don't think about, you know, is there mentorship there? Will I be supported? You know, so we went downtown Detroit. I didn't ask why we were going there, but we were going to a very bad area of Detroit to try to sell this stuff. We would go to liquor stores and all this stuff. We took all this crappy stuff that he had out of his truck bed and we put them in the front seat, and then so that he get stolen, he put a blanket over them. And he said that a lot of other people had been robbed when they were in downtown Detroit, which is pretty normal at the time. So we walked up and down the city in downtown Detroit in a bad area. We would try to sell things to people at bus stops, waiting for buses, people on the street corners, anybody that just happened to be walking down the street. And these weren't very, you know, these were poor people. And, you know, but all these people, you know, approach seemed to be amused and were giving us a little bit of time. But, you know, we were in an area with boarded up stores and liquor stores and rent to own stores, pawn shops and all that sort of thing. And so, you know, our only sale of the day came when we went into a liquor store, and it was one sale and for an entire day trying to talk people on the street. And this particular person just seemed, you know, distracted enough to buy something for us. And so, you know, you go to certain law firms and it's kind of the same thing. You're set loose. Sometimes you don't get any training. Sometimes you don't learn how to develop business. There's no system for that. You're on your own. A lot of attorneys, you know, stay in these positions longer than they should. So at the end of this day, we made $28 in commissions from our sales. We split the money, so we got $14 each. And after lunch and gas, you know, I might have made $1 or $2. And I wasn't even the one that made the sale. So when we got back to the office, I went in to talk to Jerry. He was again sitting on a couch, looking very pleased with his girlfriend. Back then, people smoked in the office, and he looked pretty happy. And I was pretty clear with him. Everyone else was afraid to talk to him, but I told him the job didn't make any sense. And he said, you know, of course it does. And I said, no, it doesn't. I made $14 and we went all over Detroit and walked around all day. It doesn't make any sense. And then he told me things would be better tomorrow. He reached in his pocket and he had this just giant collection of bills that people had given him after selling things. And it looked like this was his take for the day, and he was doing pretty well. He handed me $5 and I walked out. So again, I went into a job that I thought would be an incredible job. And you know, when people always are overlooking red flags when they're taking jobs. And as a recruiter, my job is not just to give people jobs, it's to help them go to places where there's stable, repeated work. And, you know, so not every opportunity you see that you may be interested in someplace in working isn't what it appears to be. Going in-house is often not what it appears to be. Going in the government now, where people are losing their jobs in just massive droves right now. Every time I log in to look at resumes in BCG, there's probably like 50 people at all these government agencies, like in Washington, D.C., looking for a job. So was that the best decision to go to work in the government when those jobs are going away? And where once you work in the government, the only other jobs you can really get are with the government, not with law firms. So if there's no jobs in the government, what do? Law firms aren't willing to hire people that have gone into the government unless you're like some, you know, high-ranking official. It's very, very difficult. So sometimes, you know, you have to be very, very careful. So steady jobs. So what does that mean? And what did I do? And again, I'm been talking about the legal profession here, but I want to give you a few examples about what I did. So I got a job in Domino's Pizza delivering pizzas, and I would get $1 for each pizza, plus minimum wage, plus tips, plus I get to eat pizza all day. And I made money. I made very good money. I didn't have to worry about commissions. And if I was going to make the next sale, every time I got to go out and deliver pizza, every time I got back, there were pizzas to deliver immediately. And I was very enthusiastic about it, and it never felt like quitting. It was an incredible job. It offered us something very good: stability, security, order. Like, I knew that I would always have pizzas delivered. I wasn't chasing sales. All I needed to do was show up and I got paid. And I knew that I could show up for as long as I wanted to. I could work there for years and make money. And it was about doing the work and getting rewarded fairly. I would make sometimes hundreds of dollars a night just by showing up and driving around. And so, in legal recruiting and what, when you're looking for a job, are you looking for something with reliable and consistent workflow, where your compensation is predictable and where you're working with people that are going to keep you around? And that's much more risky than a big payday role that depends on politics and commissions and all these fake promises of being able to work in places. Like, one of the things that I noticed, and this is just kind of an aside, is when attorneys take jobs in smaller markets, in smaller firms, most of the time they go to those firms and they're at those firms for their entire career. Honestly, like, if you take a job in, someplace in Wisconsin outside of Madison or something, you're probably going to work at that firm if you want for your entire career. You won't make, you have the ability to, you're not going to make so much money, but you're not going to have to front load your compensation for 3 or 4 or 5 years and then worry about getting a job later. You're going to have a job that you can always get. And so you will have workforce. So you may be working for that firm for 50 years, whereas you go someplace else and it'll be much less time. So who's better off? The person that has a long-term career in a law firm, or the person that works a couple of years in a big law firm and then maybe has trouble finding a job again? Now, I'm not saying that big law firms are bad, because they're actually exceptional for getting training and so forth. But if you're choosing an employer, are you choosing one where you're going to have the ability to stick around, that has a lot of work, or the partners are staying there and people aren't leaving and taking work with them? I mean, what are you doing? Are you trying to choose go in-house, where you could lose your job very quickly and be unemployed, or lose it in a year or 2 years? What are you doing with your career? Are you thinking about your long-term opportunities? Or are you just thinking about making a lot of money in the short term? So, when I was working for Jerry, I didn't have any repeat work. I would go into the Domino's Pizza and pick up pizzas and go out and make $5 tip or a $10 tip, and I make that tip. And then after getting that tip, I would, have more work when I came back. And it was great. If I tried to sell knives every day and from the prospect of making $100,000 a year, which you certainly couldn't do at Domino's, that would be a pretty bad career choice. And so, the stuff I was selling was also not stuff that people really wanted or buy more than once. If you're selling a pizza, then people are always ordering pizza, and it's always repeating itself. But if you sell someone a knife, it's not like you can come back and sell them a knife later. You've sold it once and that client is no longer around. So what are you going to do? So the quality of stuff is cheap and they wouldn't buy it twice. No one needs more than one set of fake Ginzu knives. And so I was selling stuff where I couldn't possibly get repeat customers or repeat work. And without any type of repeat work, your job's useless. So what does repeat work mean? Repeat work means that you have work that is always repeating itself. And if it repeats itself, then you have job security. And if you have job security, then you're in much better shape than someone that doesn't. So that job selling stuff door to door was useless because there's no repeat work, and you need repeat work. And what does repeat work mean? Repeat work means if you're a lawyer and you have clients and you do good work for them, they're going to continually come back to you. In large law firms with huge clients, they have huge amounts of repeat work. That's why they have billion-dollar revenues and things, because people are giving them repeat work. And so if you don't have repeat work wherever you're working at, then the job can be useless. So your success as an attorney is about finding places where there's repeat work, and preferably for as long as you want to stay there. And this is how you survive. It's not a one-time deal where you go there because you're getting a big paycheck and bonuses. Your repeat work is really what's most important. It's not about having a one-time deal or a single trial. One of the things that's very interesting about legal recruiters is legal recruiters that come to work for our firm will often start out doing like associate placements, and then they will make a big partner placement where they'll make a big commission. And then they will try to place partners for a long period, for as long as they can, and work with a couple partners at a time. And then those deals are very, very hard to close, and they fall apart a lot. And so when those deals fall apart, those attorneys, that are attorney recruiters don't have any revenue coming in the pipeline. So associates are much easier to place, and you can work with a lot of them at one time than partners. And so, if those partners are, those deals fall through, then the people suddenly aren't making any money. If they're not making any money, then they're very upset. So law firms, handle complex matters. And the best law firms are getting a lot of repeat work, meaning they're not doing like a lot of one-offs. And that gives them consistency. And it's also very good. That's why they grow. And companies and people will fail if they're not getting consistent repeat work. So if a company doesn't build good cars, then people aren't going to buy them again. They'll choose a different car. So the law firm, the company won't get repeat sales. And if you don't do good repeat work, companies like General Motors and so forth had a lot of problems in the past because they were not concentrating on good repeat work. So if someone offers you a contract position in a law firm instead of a permanent associate position, then that's a contract. That's not guaranteed repeat work. The same thing with a staff attorney job. If you take a staff attorney job, even though it may pay a little bit more than at a other law firm, or it might be a better firm, you're not guaranteed repeat work. And very dangerous, very dangerous. People take jobs in law firms as staff attorneys because they think it's a big deal to work at a big firm, but they're not getting repeat work. And so you need to always think about that when you're looking for a job. Are you getting repeat work? And so there are lots of temporary, jobs out there where you're going to get jobs for a little bit, but there are very few jobs that offer really good repeat work. And so the value of the job needs to be whether or not you're able to go there and be consistently and feel like you're consistently going to have work more and more and more. What's sad about the legal profession is in the biggest law firms, what they do, and this is a rule that happens, you can get a job with a really big law firm and you can go there, but it's dangerous because, it's very good for, 1 to 5, 6, maybe 7 or 8 years. But after that period of time, you're in a situation where you're probably not going to get repeat work because your billing rate gets too high and all sorts of other things. And so the value of the job is getting repeat work. And so people get dazzled all the time by certain types of jobs, but you should be asking when you're going to a place, is this a good place for repeat work? Is it some place where I'm consistently going to have work, or am I just spinning my wheels? And if you're not getting repeat work, but you don't think you're going to get repeat work, then that's very, very dangerous. Working at Domino's may not look impressive, but it was stability and repeat work. So repeat jobs that repeat themselves are very, very important. There's repeatable work wherever you're going, then it's important. If you interview with a firm and there's people that have been there for 10 or 15 years, then or whatever, people that have been there a long time and associates have been there a long time, then they're probably getting repeat work. So when I started my recruiting firm, one of my first employees was a relative of mine. She was just graduating from college, and I paid her $35,000 a year, which now would be a lot more money. She was doing all these clerical type jobs. 35,000 is a lot less than that would be now. It was more than she deserved, but her father had been very nice to me, and I wanted to give her a job where I felt like she could. It was my uncle, where she could get that type of work, and he had died flying the helicopter ambulance. And I'd always wanted to help her when she got older because she didn't have a father. And so I called her after this business became successful and told her I had a job for her and offered her the chance to move to Los Angeles. And it was a small office, and she sat next to a fax machine. She was very attractive. She was a model when she was younger, and anyway, she was a model. And she'd been working for me for a few weeks. I was sitting right next to a fax machine where resumes and things started coming in. And I started to see transmissions from the fax coming over every few hours from modeling agencies and that sort of thing. And she would, rush into my office and grab one of these faxes. And they were like these kind of cap calls where they would, where models would go try out. And then instead of valuing her job, she started like saying she needed the afternoon off or the morning off, and was missing at least a couple of days a week while going on tryouts. And I continued to pay her. And then she did start to get the occasional modeling job, and I was angry. And I thought, well, maybe, because she was young, she was probably very excited to be a model. And then she asked me for a raise, a significant raise. And I was like, well, why do you think you deserve a raise? And she said, well, I'm getting paid for $75 an hour to do modeling, and therefore it was worth more in the market. And then I was asking her, how many, when she does these modeling things, how many hours does she get $75 an hour for? And she said, usually one. And I said, well, then, you needed to drive back and forth the whole day. and they need to decide if they're even going to hire you when you get there. And so it's $75 for 1 hour worth of work if you get the job. And I asked her if at the time I had health insurance, or they pay her health insurance. And do you think this is something that you could be doing in 20 years? Are they going to give you work every single day of the week? And we went back and forth a little bit, and she kept saying she made $75 an hour when she was working. And that was at least 5 times or whatever the number was than I was paying her. She became very resentful about the job and eventually decided that I wasn't paying her enough. She was creating all sorts of problems. And so I eventually was very sad. I mean, I was upset about it, but I had to let her go. And then she was mad and moved out of my house, and I've never really seen her since, even though a couple of years ago, she moved to like 20 minutes from me. And I felt very badly about all this, but, and letting her go was one of the most horrible things I had to do because she was, one of my relatives and I wanted to help her. But, I remember at the time I decided to take this Dale Carnegie class, which I recommend everyone take, by the way. It can really help you become a much better person. It's actually funny that Warren Buffett, he keeps a certificate of it right behind him on his desk. And he says it's the most valuable money he's ever spent was taking that class. And so I was taking that class, and I thought that I could influence her to come to and appreciate what I was doing for her. But I was sad that I let her go. But the greatest lesson that I got from that is, she was someone that wasn't concerned with repeat work. She was concerned with, one-off work where she would make more money and make her feel more valuable than any form of repeat work. And illegal recruiting, this happens all the time. People will leave stable, long-term positions with consistent workflow for roles that may promise that they're going to make more money or something that looks better than whatever has repeat work. So they chase these one-off jobs. They will look for temporary in-house contracts, bonuses, places that offer bonuses, and maybe working on just a few matters and not have a lot of work. And, the mindset is always the same. I can make more money by doing this, but the math only works when the work is there and stays there. So, someone that has work for you waiting every single day and it's not going to go away, that's a gift. That's very, very valuable. You should think about that when you're looking to jobs. And, it's no different than having a large sum of money in the bank. If you have work that's repeating itself and you're going to consistently have that work, then you're going to be much better off than if you go someplace where that work may not repeat. And then if the work doesn't repeat, you're actually losing money. So deciding she could do modeling jobs and maybe making $150 a week, doing that at high hourly rates is no different than $150 a week is, when she was making maybe close to 800 or 900, nowhere near that. So, in law firms, or whatever job you're taking, you need to make sure that there's consistent work. And that's the only foundation you can have to build a career. The most important thing, by the way, for any legal career is to have access to work. So partners only become partners when they have access to repeatable work, usually their own clients. That repeats itself. Law firms only function when they have most of the time access to repeat work. And yet attorneys will leave jobs where there is repeat work and go to places where there isn't repeat work. And so, you're better off with waking up each day and knowing that you have repeatable work than you are taking a position where you may not have that work. And so you have to think long-term about everything you do. You need to choose environments that are going to give you a long-term career runway over ones that aren't. So this is one of the things that I've noticed in my career. And I don't have a ton more to say about this topic, but I'll just talk about it a little bit more. But when I was a senior, I was at the University of Chicago, and I took an economics class from a very famous economist. And in order to get into the class, I had to do some sort of auction because everyone wanted to take the class from this person. And I don't remember a lot of specifics, but I remember him talking about his job and what it took for the school to make someone like him a tenured professor. He stated at the time that he made $150,000 a year. Someone like that now probably would make $300,000 to $500,000. But in order for the school to offer someone like him tenure, they need to have like an endowment of at least $3 million, which is going to translate into, at 5% interest or whatever it was, that would be $150,000. And so he said that, based on the fact that he'd have his job the rest of his life, there was no difference between him, someone that was making $150,000 a year, and someone who has $3 million in the bank that can live off that money. And so due to his tenure and the amount of money the school needed to set aside in order to pay him, the economists believe that he was better off than lawyers, doctors, businessmen, and so forth, none of who would have $3 million in the bank, which I guess now would be like 6 million. But based on the way he looked at it, he said, I have a job that's going to pay me $150,000 a year. So, and I will get paid that for the rest of my life. And so it's no different than someone that has $3 million in the bank. As a matter of fact, it's probably better. I'm sure he gets health insurance and all sorts of stuff. So think about that. I just want you to think about that for a moment. So someone that gets a job as a tenured professor in a college or a law school or whatever it is, they get this job and they're paid a certain amount of money for the rest of their life. That's no different than having a large sum of money in the bank. As a matter of fact, it's probably better because he doesn't have to spend the full $150,000 and more. So he said, based on having a job that paid me $150,000 a year for the rest of my life, I am a multimillionaire. It's no different than having $3 million in the bank. And think about that. Like if you get a job as a federal judge, you have the job for the rest of your life. That's an annuity. Any type of job that you can have for a long period of time, if you can make a certain amount of money, that's like having an annuity. So this particular lesson stuck with me a long time. And he was pointing out something that most professionals miss, like having consistency in the work you have is a form of wealth. So if you have a job that's going to pay you $200,000 a year for a long period of time, that's no different than having that much money in the bank. And people often miss this, entirely. So tenure in a university is having a lifetime supply of work. And it's almost impossible to take someone's tenure away. So, once you have that, you're in a very good position, you're rich. And so same thing with federal judges. And so, if you, look at a repeatable work, you're actually very rich compared to someone that doesn't have that. And so, chasing certain things that aren't going to give you repeat work can be very, very dangerous. Is it better to have a job that lasts 5 years at $300,000 a year than a job that will pay $200,000 a year for the next 30 years? Like, what is better? So a lot of times candidates don't think, long term and the value of firms that offer stability or being someplace where you constantly have work, or if you work in a law firm where you're able to bring in clients, have a certain amount of money coming in each year. So, that's good. Or your skills are deepening in a law firm. So that's going to give you access to more and more repeat work. So you take a job at a large law firm and you learn how to be a very sophisticated litigator. That will offer you access to repeat work. All this sort of stuff is very important. So, a tenured legal career always doesn't look so glamorous, but this attorney, if an attorney has steady, repeatable work, there's always going to be work to do. And, you're consistently, you have the equivalent of lifetimes of earning potential instead of a job that doesn't offer you that. So think about your career. Like, are you chasing short-term amounts of money, or are you learning about practice area you can do for the rest of your career? What are you doing to give yourself access and set yourself up to always have work? Are you jumping from job to job where you're not going to have that type of work just because you're interested in a job that's going to pay you a lot? So prestige, bonuses, all of this doesn't matter. There's no consistency. And just like the modeling gig, something like that is not impressive. So people that win are the ones that have repeatable work. Even if they're not making a lot of money, they're at a place where they're consistently getting work. Sometimes people complain that there's too much work, but having too much work could be good, because there's going to be work there. So you invest in platforms for your career, not payoffs. And then, the longer you do it, the better your career is. So you have to prioritize this. And I'm almost done with this presentation, and I don't want to keep making this point over and over again, but when companies fail, it's because they don't have access to cash. The cash flow starts coming. When people fail, they don't have access to cash. So when you don't have a job, you don't have access to cash flow. So are you going to put yourself in a position where you're always going to have access to cash flow? Or are you going to put yourself in a position where you're risking that cash flow all the time? Companies are dangerous. Going to work in companies are dangerous because they will merge, or their business model will no longer work. And so same thing with people. So work that repeats itself is better. And law firms are the same way. So if you're consistently getting work and not just getting assignments here and there, and if people are sticking around and the law firm is keeping them, that's stability. Same thing in life. Like do you want to have a new girlfriend every 2 months for the rest of your life? Or you do want to where you may be breaking up with them or them breaking up with you? Or do you want to have be with someone where they're going to be with you and repeatedly support you and be your spouse or whatever. You have to choose this. When you get a mortgage, mortgages company that you get mortgages they want you to prove that that you have access to work, that you consistently have a certain amount of income, and banks aren't going to take the risk to give you a loan if they don't think you're going to be able to pay them over the long term. That's just how it works. They may give you, they're only going to give you a mortgage when you show that you have access to consistent money coming in. So in the mortgage market, it's the same thing. Like, they need to see that you have a repeatable cash flow that's consistently repeating, and that's what you need to do. So that's what you need to do to get a mortgage. That's what a business needs to do to stay in business. That's what everything is all about. Companies fail when their business models no longer work. They do something wrong, and people aren't buying their cars anymore. Like, people aren't buying Teslas because people don't like Elon Musk. And so that's people aren't buying cars from him. So there's repeat works, stocks are down, all these companies that go out of business, people aren't giving them a repeat work. And same thing, legal recruiting, restaurants that don't get repeat business go out of business. It's just kind of the rule that people don't think about, in their lives. People decide to become consultants and chase people to help. I mean, all these sorts of things. Like, roles may sound appealing, but if they don't offer you repeat work, they'll often lead to financial insecurity, stalled growth, and all sorts of things. And if you're trying to get a loan as an attorney and you're bouncing around from job to job and your income's fluctuating, they're not going to like that. So you're not going to get a loan. If you're trying to sell a company and your revenues are up and then they're down and they're not consistent, no one's going to buy your company. And so you may be working at not the most prestigious law firm, but maybe you're getting consistent hours, you're able to get clients, and you're getting repeatable work, and that gives you power. And having that income coming in consistently is something that that you need in order to have a good career in life. There was an explosion in 1999 to 2000 of these internet companies that started, and this was the beginning of the internet. It was like the Wild West, and all these companies were getting money from venture capital and private equity firms, and people were starting all these companies, sometimes just ridiculous. I mean, the most ridiculous companies you can imagine. And so people left law firms because they thought there were going to be all these jobs with, limitless opportunities, because all these .com companies were paying attorneys a lot of money. And sometimes they didn't even have very high salaries. They would just give people stock options where they felt they could make a lot of money. And these options ended up being worthless. And then when these people from them went to these companies, tried to get back in law firms, most of these law firms weren't hiring again. Not only were they not hiring, but they were letting go all their corporate associates too, because they were getting all this work from .com companies, and they grew in response to that. And so these people that all went in-house for these promises of potential huge bonuses and things from selling stocks never were able to get another steady legal job again in a law firm, and certainly not as good as the jobs they had left for law firms. And so at the same time, all these people had left banks and all these other things to work in these startups, and they did so that the companies that were very risky, had bad business models, and ended up going out of business. And why did they go out of business? They went out of business because they couldn't generate customers that would consistently buy whatever they were selling. And because they didn't generate those type of customers, they went out of business. And so this stuff happens again and again in the legal professions. People will leave stable positions for these opportunities that evaporate in months. I see people go to little law firms that their friends are starting, and then those never work out. I see people taking jobs in new companies that their friends are starting. Those almost never work out. And they will leave big firms and mid-sized firms and stuff to do that, but not knowing if there's something foundational there with work that's going to repeat itself. These companies are improving. These law firms are improving. And so that it cannot work. And so then when they try to return to a place that does have repaired work, that opportunity is often passed them by. If you go in-house and go to the government and things, law firms typically will not take a risk on you when you want to come back. And so law firms also want consistency. They want people that will do the work repeatedly. Meaning they don't want people that are unreliable and won't be there doing their work. They want people that are showing that they're willing to do repeat work. And what does that mean? That means one of the biggest things that law firms look for when they're hiring people is they ask themselves, will the person do the work long term? Meaning, is this person likely to stay here? And if they see you bouncing out of law firms to do something else, then they know you won't. If they see you bouncing between firms every 6 months or 2 years for a period of time, they know that you're not someone that will do things long term. So that's not a good investment. Law firms need people It shows stability, and you want the same thing. If you were hiring a nanny to work in your house and she had a new job every 3 months, then it's pretty clear that she'll do the same thing with you. So you can't chase unreliable career paths. You need to make sure that you're consistent and you're trying to find places that where the work repeats itself. Like it looks like you'll do work, you're going to work for them, so you can give them a consistency as well. And so sometimes a much lower salary, might not on the surface appear like appealing, but can actually be very worthwhile that you have kind of repeat work. So the best job is a job. This is just a very simple message that keeps repeating itself each day. It just keeps repeating it over and over again. This is how you build a future. This is how you accumulate wealth. This is how you find freedom. This is how you get mortgages, how you raise families, like all this sorts of stuff. You have to have access to work that repeats itself. Think about that. Like, how can you raise a family if your income is inconsistent? How can you settle down and have a house if your income is inconsistent? You're chasing people. How can you have job security if you look like someone that is always going to leave and is inconsistent? How can you do any of these things if you don't show yourself as someone that's willing to do that? So the final point is just that you need to have access to repeatable work. And this sort of stuff is very important, however well something appears on the surface. Companies need that, careers need that. Everything is like, this is one of the most essential lessons of the legal profession. And if you don't look like you'll do repeat work for someone, then they're not going to hire you. No law firm is going to hire someone that moves around all the time. No company is going to be able to function if the work doesn't repeat itself. So you need to have work that just keeps coming. So I'll take a quick break just for like a minute or two. And then when I come back, I will ask questions. Asking questions and seeing other people's answers and so forth to them is really probably, one of the most important parts of this webinar. It doesn't have to be about what I just talked about. It can be about any questions or anything that you have. I love questions. It's one of my favorite parts of the week because when you ask questions, it helps me. I can help you a lot more than maybe just watching the webinar. Take a quick break, just a minute or two, and then when I come back, we will do questions. Thank you. All right. So we will get started. Questions. And thank you everyone who's been asking questions. I think this is just very important for everyone to hear your questions. And by the way, questions will be, I will answer everyone's questions through here. And also when I do answer the questions, if you're logged into Zoom or whatever, no one's going to see your name. Okay, applied to a large firm in January, was rejected. Now the firm has a reception. Would it be beneficial to attend? How long can a rejected applicant reapply? You can reply to law firms as often as you want to reapply. Sometimes if you go to receptions, you may meet someone and impress them and they may want to interview you. A lot of times law firms will hire people that really network with them very hard and try to bond with them and so forth. And if they see you at a reception, they could potentially bring you in. Law firms reject people for all sorts of reasons. They typically will reject people just if they have better applicants or you don't fit what they're looking for. But if you're applying to large law firms, you should apply to as many as you possibly can. It's ridiculous to think that only one law firm is, where you should cast your lot. You should try to apply to a lot of large law firms. Most people that are trying to apply to large law firms will apply to numerous ones before they get interviews. So yes, you can always reapply. Most law firms have applicant tracking systems, so they will know you applied before. And the law firm may reject you just because someone with more experience applies or whatever. You can apply to large law firms as often as you want. But generally, if you're not getting a job there or interviews, it could be because they're already interviewing people and they don't want to interview anybody more, or it could be because you don't fit their profile. Okay, let's see here. Okay. In this legal market, oops, wrong one, sorry. Okay. In today's legal market, especially with so many legal tech startups and boutique firms offering equity instead of stable salaries, how can I realistically assess an offer's true long-term consistency versus just the illusion of future wealth? Well, there's nothing wrong with going to work with any law firm to learn something. So if the law firm is, working with emerging tech startups or whatever it is, then that could be a good career choice. Sometimes if you're going to a certain types of firm that's offering equity instead of a stable salary, that's a risk you could take. And there's often, there can often be really good upsides. When I hear about really good upsides and talk to the recruiters, people might go someplace and get an upside and you can make $5 million or $10 million sometimes. So people do very, very well doing that. I'm not saying that you shouldn't. And often the risk will, is a good risk to take, but it's not necessarily going to lead to consistency, a lot of times, and it can be very risky. So people take these risks all the time. And if it's not a law firm you're doing it with and it doesn't work out, then it becomes much more difficult to move back to a law firm. I mean, you certainly can. It's not impossible, but it's always, it can be very dangerous. So, is that the kind of risk you want to take? If you don't know that you want to be in a law firm for the rest of your career and you want to do something else, and there's nothing wrong with doing that, you just have to do kind of what appeals to you. And what I would say to everyone is, the most important, oh, let me just fix this. I'm sorry, my camera's off. The most important thing you can do, oh, here we go. The most important thing you can do is just any type of job that you're taking, you need to do it because you want to, and because, working in the position makes you feel good. Like, you have to feel good about yourself when you're doing whatever job. It has to kind of nurture you in some respects. So if you're in a law firm and that doesn't nurture you, or you're someone that likes to take risks, then, you're doing the right thing. You're doing the right thing, trying to be someplace where there can actually be a long-term future, as opposed to, something that makes you happy as opposed to something that doesn't. Okay, I'm already in a prestigious but unstable litigation boutique that has large gaps between cases. Would you recommend transition to a mid? 1 second, please. Hi.
Your camera's not on, but it's
Oh, thanks.
on.
Great, thanks. But give me 1 second. I'm trying to make sure my camera's on. It should be. Okay, there we go. So it says, if I'm already in a prestigious but unstable litigation boutique that has large gaps between cases, would you recommend transitioning to a mid-sized firm with more stable insurance defense work, even if it feels like a step down prestige-wise? Okay, so in addition to access to work, it's also important to get access to the best work. So if you're in a litigation boutique and you're learning something very interesting, where the work's very sophisticated, is it better to do something that is interesting for you, that kind of fulfills you, or is it better doing work that's stable? So insurance defense, if you're doing commercial litigation as opposed to insurance defense always pays less. Insurance defense, the work is usually not as complex. So if somebody, hits somebody with a car, the person that's hit, there's pretty clear liability. It's not very difficult for, to litigate those cases. And so insurance defense often is, you're hired by insurance companies to do work at a lower billable hour and a lower rate and so forth. So, is it make sense to do work that's not sophisticated versus overly sophisticated? So insurance defense can be a risky type of job to do, and you may not like that because the work isn't as intellectually sophisticated many times, but it does offer, repeat work, and you can do insurance defense your whole career, but your income is going to be limited because insurance companies do not spend a lot of money on attorneys. And moreover, in insurance defense, it's not too, most of the cases are just settled and it's not as sophisticated. So would I take a job doing insurance defense over working in a sophisticated litigation boutique? I probably would. If it was me, I would take the job in a litigation boutique based on the fact that the work is probably going to be more intellectually challenging. That's what I would do. There's nothing wrong with insurance defense, but the long-term career opportunities there are much less than they would be with other types of, other types of work. Okay, let's see here. I'm trying to evaluate insurance defenses. By the way, it's a risky practice area to get into, just because you're often not being exposed to very sophisticated work, and because of that, it often is not as interesting or fun for people, and once you do insurance defense, it becomes very hard to do commercial litigation. For example, commercial litigation involves companies fighting with each other about various things and having to prove terms of contracts, having to, go after somebody for something you don't like from a business standpoint. And then they're just the work that companies require versus what insurance companies require. Companies are looking for the best possible attorneys they can have to fight and so forth. And insurance defense firms are not doing the same thing. Okay, I'm trying to evaluate an opportunity now that seems lucrative, but isn't guaranteed to last. What should I look for to spot hidden dangers? So the dangers would be a lot of different things. The dangers would be, what happens to people that go there? Like, are the people that go there stay, or did they leave? Is this a short-term opportunity for you to just work on a matter right now? Or is it a long-term opportunity? How do you spot hidden dangers? You look at whatever the matter is, and then you see if it's a place where you can stay around long-term. Generally, one of the ways to tell if a job is dangerous is when you're interviewing. So when you're interviewing with the firm where they're making you an offer, like, what is, does it look like are these people connecting with you, or are they not? I had a woman in New York and she received an international trade attorney. And she received an offer from this firm, I don't know, a couple of weeks ago. And all that happened with the offer is it came through the human resources, not the partners or anybody she spoke with. It just came through HR. And no one called her, no one tried to bond with her or anything like that. And when that happens, when a law firm is very impersonal, when you're trying to work there, that often shows you that you're just kind of a tool in the cog in the wheel, and that they don't really value you. So, if you go to a firm and you're interviewing with them, and they seem like they're connecting with you, and you like the people, and you feel like these are the kind of people that would protect me, then you're usually going to be much better off than if you just take some place where people are cold and that sort of thing. So you have to look at the job in that way. And then jobs that are, lucrative but aren't guaranteed to last, that's important. So if you have a job offer for someplace paying $200,000 a year and you think you could be there in 5 years, and one job pays $300,000 a year, but you don't know how long you'll be there, that's a risk. And then because you may have periods of unemployment, all these sorts of things, could hurt you. So there's all sorts of ways to evaluate jobs. But one of the ways I always like to do it is to just think about, am I comfortable with these people? Or are they being impersonal with me? If they're being impersonal with you, then that shows you that, you're not going to be valued as a person. You're valued just for the work usually, and they're not connecting with you because they don't want that. Let's see here. Let's see here. So one point that you made that really resonated with me was avoiding short-term flashy opportunities that don't lead to sustained growth. Could you elaborate on specific red flags I should watch for in the law firm's marketing materials or interviews that might indicate they're selling illusion success rather than offering consistent, steady work? Okay, so there's a bunch of different ways to look at that, but the red flags would be: is the firm growing? Are people staying there? Do the people that I'm talking to, like as associates, do they seem like they're staying there? Is what they're selling really a good long-term opportunity, or the short-term opportunity? So in general, partners of law firms are going to want to pay the associates as least as they can in order for them to stay there and work. And the partners want to make as much money as they can. So their goal is to pay associates as little as they can to get the people that they need. And then the goal of your goal should be, to try to go to a place where maybe there's more than that. Or, why is there the opportunity? Because no law firm is going to pay you more than they have to. No law firm is going to offer you like huge bonuses and things unless they have to. I mean, that's what happens. Like, no one is making business decisions in law firms or in the business world unless they have to. So people make partners in law firms only when they have to. Like, you have so much business that if they don't do that, they're going to lose this cash flow. Or maybe you're very, very good in a certain practice area, and like they can't find anybody but like you. So they're only going to advance you if they have that. So is there something that's very special about you that's going to give you a lot of success, or are you just the same as any other attorney in the market? I mean, you may have extremely good abilities in something, so that's not the illusion of success, but is there anything special about you that would make them give you all this success because they have to? Like, people only do things when they have to. Partners only make partner when the firm has to make them partner. Law firms only pay people a lot of money when they have to get the best people. And so, if the law firm's marketing materials are very exciting and it looks like the firm's expanding, then they're going to need people there that understand the cases or whatever they're working on. And maybe they want people that are going to be there long term for that. So you have to decide, like, is there something special about me where the law firm's going to advance me because they have to? Sometimes law firms will make partners of people just to give the idea of the people working below them, all the other associates or people going there, that there is success possible. Many times that type of success is not something that is really going to happen. So you have to think about everything from a business standpoint. Like, if they're talking about that, you could be very successful there, is there any reason why they would have to advance you over other people? Okay, you discussed how consistency compounds over time into real wealth. For attorneys who early in their careers who may not have yet had access to a steady book of business, what are the best steps we can take to start positioning ourselves today for consistent client flow or casework 5 to 10 years from now? So, of course, you don't have access to a book of business. So how do you start positioning yourselves for consistent client flow or casework? Well, the first thing you do is you become an expert in your practice area. So the nice thing about law firms, and most people don't understand this, is when you go there, they are, especially as a young associate, they are training you in your practice area. So if you're getting trained in your practice area, like, the fact that you're getting paid to do that and paid to learn your practice area is great. So it takes about 5 years of training in a law firm to learn a practice area. You don't learn a practice area in 1 year. You learn your practice area over the course of 5 years because you need to do all sorts of things. If you're a litigator, instead of doing discovery, you need to learn how to do motions, and you need to learn how to do motions and eliminate for going to trial. You need to learn how to do opening statements. You need to learn how to do depositions. And the longer you do something, the better trained you'll be, and the better long-term opportunities you have. So how do you position yourself for consistent client for a casework? The first thing is you learn your practice area. And after you learn your practice area, then you start learning how to develop business. Most people develop business, a lot of them, by staying close to people that they knew in law school and being in contact with them. And those people can be business. Other people learn how to develop business by becoming an expert in their practice area, writing articles, giving presentations, getting out there, and then trying to meet clients and so forth. So you should always be thinking about, like, what can I do to advance to the next stage? What can I do? How can I advance to the next stage of my career? Because the better you do at that, the longer, the better you're going to be. So you always think, forward thinking, what do I want to be 1 year from now? What do I want to be 2 years from now? And so you do that as an attorney, you set goals. And most attorneys do not have goals. They just are sitting there working without goals, which is completely insane. So the first 5 years of your practice, your goal is to become an expert in your practice area and start networking and being in contact with people and writing papers and doing all these sorts of things to start positioning yourself for that. And then staying, like not leaving. If you leave, I mean, why would you leave if you've got 5 years training in a law firm to go into a practice setting and do something completely different from what you're doing right now? That's not positioning you for consistent work. If you take some random in-house job or some random opportunity that's not in the law firm, or you go to some other practice setting, you've actually given up all that investment in what you've done, or you've given up the political capital you built inside of a law firm, all that sort of stuff. So political capital means you have relationships and people that are giving you work and all sorts of things. So having consistent work, you do the best work you can at the law firm you're at, you impress people, you don't leave when you don't need to. And all these things can make a huge difference in your career, help you. Okay, let's see here. Thanks for all these questions. These are great questions people about today. I'm actually very impressed with them. I didn't expect a lot of questions at this webinar for whatever reason. Okay, you mentioned that repeatable work is a cornerstone of building real wealth as an attorney. I'm considering a lateral move into a niche practice area that isn't high volume, but is highly specialized. How do I evaluate if specializing too narrowly could limit my access to the kind of work you described, and therefore impact my long-term financial stability? Okay, so that's a good question. So, if you go into a certain practice area that's very specialized, that actually is very good because there's not a lot of people that do that. So if you decide you just want to be a general corporate attorney, but you're competing with every general corporate attorney out there, it's going to be much harder to get positions. If you do work that's very specialized, that's very good because law firms cannot find people that do very highly specialized work. So you're actually in a better practice area many times than someone that's just doing some kind of general practice area, because clients also need people that do niche work. So if you're one of, a few people in the city that does work in a niche practice area, then you're going to be in a much better place than if you're not many times. Now, that doesn't mean that you're at risk because the practice area, there's not a lot of jobs in the practice area. One of the most dangerous practice areas is trademark law. Trademark law is extremely dangerous because what happens in that practice area is people do trademarks when the economy's good. The work is often, the money, like for doing a trademark, is not repeatable because people do a trademark and then they're done. Whereas people do certain types of litigation and the litigation just keeps going on and on and on. And that's actually gives you repeat work. So having a practice area where, the work is highly specialized and where there's not a lot of people doing it, where you can consistently find work is good. Like one of the most marketable practice areas is like ERISA. Like there's just a lot of, that's very specialized. And if you do that, ERISA work like is something that attorneys do over and over again, for clients. Like clients just pay one attorney and law firm or a couple of attorneys to do it. So that's good. If you do other types of, repeatable work, might be examples like family law. You decide to be a family law attorney, there's always going to be people getting divorced. You decide you want to be, what are some other family law, trust and estates attorney. People are always getting old and need trust. So, having access to that type of work is very, very important and helpful. Okay, let's see here. Next question. At one point, do you ever believe that it makes sense attorney to accept a one-off high-paying opportunity? For example, if they transition to another different practice area? Could strategically using a one-off be advisable if approached carefully? Is it always a long-term risk? No, I mean, if you go into a certain practice area, like you don't like the practice area for whatever reason, and you want to do a different practice area, that's okay, but you've lost all the, the experience you got in your current practice area. So you're really starting from scratch. But people can do that. Strategically using a one-off can be advisable, if it's approached carefully. There's nothing wrong with relocating to different markets, but I would say in a lot of cases, large markets are good because there's going to be a lot of clients, but there's also a lot of attorneys. So there's an overabundance of attorneys in large markets as opposed to small markets. When you go into rural areas of the country, a lot of times there's no attorneys there. So there's always access to work. So, certain practice areas, there's going to be more work than you're currently doing, or certain markets, there may be access to more work. So all those kind of questions, those are good questions. You should evaluate in the context of the market you're going into, in terms of, the practice area you're in. I get these calls like, I don't know, once every year or so from someone in these like small communities. They could be farming areas, they could be, remote desert towns where they're literally like the only attorney there and they have all this work, but they're retiring and they want someone to take it over. Like, that's crazy. There's access to all this types of work and they could do it for the rest of their careers. Yeah, thank you for all these questions. These are great questions, and they're about the webinar, which I'm surprised, which is great. So attorneys have already made the mistake of chasing several one-off roles early in their careers. What are some practical strategies to rebuild credibility with law firms that value long-term commitment and stability? Is there a way to frame the experience positively in a resume or in interviews? Well, so if you've taken a lot of short-term jobs, in your career, all that means is you'll have to go to a firm that may not be as prestigious as that you could have gotten had you not made all those moves. You'll have to start from the beginning. Law firms, when they interview you, let me see if I can do this. It's kind of a fun thing real quick. Second. I'm just going to go over some things that, and this is actually very valuable for people. So hopefully this will help. Computer's freezing down. Okay. So I'm going to share the screen. Okay, so this is kind of interesting. Like, I've been in this profession for 25 years, and I can show you, this is what I do with all my candidates, and I'll kind of go over this with you right now. When this is what law firms are looking for when they're hiring you. All right, so when a law firm's interviewing, like any attorney, there's certain questions that they're asking, and this is kind of the foundations of getting hired somewhere. So this is something that I'll make sure is sent. This usually I reserve just for the candidates are interviewing, but I'll make sure that in addition to sending you the PowerPoint, after the presentation, I will send everyone who's on the call a copy of this. But when you go into interviews, first of all, if you get an interview, you have a 90% chance of getting a job if you don't screw up. So, it's this particular, thing with, with interviewing, I'm not going to go through all this, I guess, but it's important. But these are kind of the things that people that are looking for. So they're looking for whether or not you can do the work that they have. So if someone has a certain type of job, they want to make sure that you can do the work. So that means you typically will have to have experience in that practice area and know what you're doing, and you're doing the job means you're willing to work the hours they want, you're willing to work in the office when they want. But that first one is, can you do the job? The second thing is commitment. So if you were an employer, they're looking for people that are good to commit. So if you've had a series of one-off jobs, then it doesn't look like you're going to be able to commit, so they're not going to like you. So the only firms you can get a job with are firms that the value proposition and risk of hiring you outweighs your potential commitment. So how do you frame commitment? When you go into interviews, if you're coming from another practice setting, like in-house, you say that, I really miss being a law firm. This is what I want to do the rest of my career. I want to settle down and do something long-term. And people say that all the time, but are you really someone that will commit? So if you are someone that will commit, you have to think about the reasons you'll commit, and you have to write down those reasons, like why you want to commit. And you have to really convey that to people. But, if you were operating a business, just think about yourself with a law firm. Are you better off hiring someone that's unlikely to stay, or are you better off hiring someone that's likely to stay? So that's just a big thing. And you have to look like you have commitment. So when you do get a job in a law firm, and there's all sorts of law firms of different sizes that will take a risk on you. But you really do need to commit. So future employers will look at you as someone who's committed. And you would want the same thing. if you're an employer as well, you would want to hire someone that's likely to commit. There's just, a few other things here that are kind of important. I don't really need to go into all of them, but, being able to do the job, being able to manage means you'll do things the way they want to do them. A lot of people come in, with these things where it looks like they're, they know what they're doing. They're not going to be soldiers as opposed to generals. So if you have the kind of personality where you want to lead people and do all this sort of stuff, that's not what a law firm wants. A law firm wants someone that's going to be a soldier and do what they want. And that's what soldiers do. Soldiers will march into battle, people shooting at them and killing people beside them and stuff because they're willing to do what a general wants. So you need to be a soldier. And then you need to look like someone that wants the job. Like instead of just someone that's kind of feeling an employer out to see if they like them, you need to look like someone who really wants the job. And then you need to look like someone, then they need to like you. But being able to commit is one of the most important things that you can do and look like when you're interviewing with firms. I mean, you would just think about it from your point of view. You would want someone that would, look like they're going to stay around. Why would you hire someone and invest your time training them and working with them and introducing them to clients and having them work on client matters if they were just going to be gone? So this is something everyone should think about. Like, are you committed to working in a law firm? Are you committed to being an attorney? Are you committed to finding a place and staying there long term? Because if you're not, you have to ask yourself, like, am I in the wrong profession? And you may be. There's nothing wrong with being in the wrong profession. Like, not everybody that goes to law school needs to be an attorney, work in a law firm. I mean, sometimes you're just in the wrong profession that doesn't match your interest. And, just two examples, like Bill Clinton went to Yale Law School, and then he took a job teaching at the University of Arkansas School of Law. He didn't want to work in a law firm. Barack Obama went to Harvard Law School, the Harvard Law Review and all these things. He didn't want to work in a law firm. He decided to be an adjunct professor at the University of Chicago Law School. So, there's nothing wrong with not working in a law firm and being a lawyer. You have to do, what you think is in your best interest and what makes you happy. When you do that, you're going to be much better off than someone that doesn't. So don't think that what I'm saying means you need to work in a law firm, but you need to do something that you feel like you can commit to. I mean, are you going to get married and not be committed to your spouse? Are you going to, what is your commitments? You need to think about all those things. Okay, so thank you for that question. That was a great one. See you. In your experience working with attorneys, how can I communicate during interviews that I'm looking for long-term consistent work without sounding like I lack ambition for driving growth? What are some ways to frame this positively for potential employers? Well, all law firms want people that have ambition and want to grow. They want you to, work as hard as you possibly can. That shows that you have ambition. So someone that builds, I was at my first firm, I was at Quinn Emanuel, and I was meeting with John Quinn when I was quitting. Came into my office, tried to talk to me about staying. So I was meeting with him, and I was like, well, I was, concerned that my friend would build, a lot of hours, didn't make partner. And he said, well, your friend only billed 2,600 hours, and the person I made partner billed 32. So it was just like, that's more ambition, billing 3,200 hours versus 2,600 hours. And so, you frame your ambition as, that you're going to go there and work really, really hard. And then you tell them that this is a much better place than other types of places because I can stick around for a long period of time. I remember when I was interviewing with a law firm in Los Angeles once, and I was talking to them, and their salaries weren't as high as I wanted to make. And they said, well, that's fine, but people that come here stay and all that sort of thing. And I thought that was very interesting. Like that was a long-term opportunity as opposed to a short-term opportunity, stuff that's important to think about. So how can a lateral move be evaluated in terms of repeat work potential versus a one-off payoff? What questions should I be asking during interviews to realistically assess whether the firm will offer a consistent stable work over time? Well, I don't think they will tell you that most times, but the best way to see that is like, are people sticking around with the firm and have people been there for a long period of time? So if people have been there for a long period of time, then that is much better shows that they're likely to have that type of work. You can also ask them what type of cases they work on. So people that represent large companies typically have a lot of work. People that represent certain types of companies in their work typically have a lot of repeat work. The family law firm that does a lot of divorces, that's consistent work. So you have to ask, what type of work are they doing? And does it look like it's consistent? They will generally tell you. If they have a lot of work, they'll tell you. If they have a lot of work that's consistently happening, then that's a much better risk of going someplace that doesn't necessarily have that. Wow, a lot of questions about this. It's very interesting. I didn't expect so many questions about this matter. Okay, what type of practice areas are considered repeat work and what are not? I suppose some policies and economics affected transactional work are unstable, like capital markets, energy, bankruptcy, et cetera. Insurance defense can be repeated work. All right, so I'll review practice areas with everyone real quick, just to show you some examples of repeat work. And the practice area one, by the way, is a really good question because certain practice areas will have a lot of repeat work and others won't. So let me share those with everyone right now. This is a very good question. This could change the course of your career if you understand, if I understand what I'm talking about. Okay, candidate search practice areas. Sorry, practice areas. Okay, so what kind of practice areas have repeat work? So alcohol and beverage law, that's not something anybody's doing, but that is very, anyway, probably not as much repeat work. Antitrust, not as much repeat work. So, there's certain firms that are very good for antitrust practices, but in general, not a lot of repeat work. Bankruptcy, again, that's, dependent on the economy. So not always a lot of repeat work. Construction's a very good one. Construction agreements, construction litigation, construction plaintiffs work. Construction is a great practice area if you can get into it. There's always a lot of repeat work there. Corporate law is dangerous. So corporate law is dangerous because capital markets and stuff happens when there's a lot of activity in the market, meaning IPOs and that sort of thing. Technology transactions can look like a really good practice area, but that can also fluctuate. Same thing with most practice areas in corporate. So corporate can be very dangerous, but it can also be a very stable practice area in smaller markets, but in large markets, it can be very dangerous. Criminal law is obviously a very good practice area because criminals are always getting arrested and having, that sort of thing. Data privacy is a good practice area right now, but it's a practice area where there's a lot of stuff happening in terms of, there's a lot of very fast growth right now, but I think that a lot of that, can go away very quickly. Education is a very good practice area because there's always going to be education related work because there's so many schools and things. That's a fantastic practice area. It's a very niche practice area, but a lot of people don't go into it. Energy and oil and gas is very, very dangerous. So that can be very difficult because that also fluctuates with the economy and what's going on with energy prices and all these sorts of things. So energy attorneys don't have a lot of career stability. Entertainment, same thing, there often is not a lot of career stability there. That can be a very difficult practice area. Environmental land use, same thing, extremely risky because there's always going to be not always a lot of environmental litigation. It often depends on the presidential elections and things, but land use and zoning is a very good practice area. So if you do land use and zoning, you typically will always have a lot of work. Risk is the same thing. That's a lot of repeat work. That's a very good practice area if you can get into it. Family law is exceptional. There's always going to be family law work. Very, very smart to go into that. If that's the kind of thing you're interested in. Project finance is dangerous. Most of these types of financial stuff are dangerous and those can fluctuate with the economy. Food and drug law is an excellent practice area if you can get into it. There's always work there. Government, yeah, that's okay. But that's not not the best. Healthcare is a great one. There's always a lot of work in healthcare. So if you can become a healthcare attorney, that's good. Immigration is very good. It can fluctuate based on presidential administrations and priorities, but it's always good. Insurance defense is very good. So exceptional. There's always work. Insurance coverage is very good. There's always work. So insurance coverage is a much higher paid branch of insurance. It's not insurance defense. It's basically arguing about policies and things. And so that's very good. Intellectual property can be risky. Patent work is okay. Continually goes, it's always going on. But, IP litigation can fluctuate. Patent and trademark and things can fluctuate based on the economy. And patent litigation and so forth can fluctuate. There used to be a lot of patent litigation. There were a ton of patent litigators. And then there was years ago, the Supreme Court decision that made it difficult for patent trolls. And so a lot of work went away. All forms of employment work are great. So there's always employment work, whether it's defense or plaintiffs. That's a very good practice area. Different types of litigation. A lot of these are, economically dependent. I'm not going to go through all of them, but product liability is very good. Medical malpractice, these types of criminal law, construction, commercial litigation. There's always work in those practice areas. So there's repeatable work. One of the things that's important that you have two types of practice areas. You have consumer facing practice areas where you're working for individuals, and you have company facing practice areas. So company facing practice areas are good because companies can always write lots of checks. for, people working for them. But practice areas where where people are working on behalf of individuals can be very good too, but they don't pay as much and they're not as much, they're kind of one-offs. Municipal law is an excellent practice area. There's always repeatable work. Real estate is a decent practice area. There's always people buying and selling things, and leasing things, but when the economy slows down and that work slows down, there's not a lot of repeatable work. Tax is an extremely risky practice area because a lot of different types of tax will be dependent on the economy. So tax attorneys typically have a very, very difficult time. A lot of them go in-house, the accounting firms, and then they try to go to law firms. It can be very difficult, but there's certain practice areas that are pretty good, so state and local is often okay. M&A is dependent on the economy, but then tax controversy is very good. So that's fighting with the IRS and stuff, and that's always going on. Telecom's risky. Trust in estates is an exceptional practice area. It's one of the best because there's a lot of repeatable work, and then workers' compensation is also a very good practice area because that's always going on. So that's a lot of detail, but I wanted to provide that. I'll also, when this is done, I will provide a write-up of what we covered in the webinar, so that can help people. But in general, that's kind of how those practice areas work. And so, practice areas that I talked about that have repeatable work are good. You can always do trust in estates work. There's always going to be people doing it. You can always do family. People always need family law attorneys. You can always do all these different practice areas because people are always going to need those types of attorneys. So if you get that work, it's very good. Okay, I think after this there's one other question. So if anybody has any other questions, just ask them now. I'm doing a clerkship now. If I've moved firms several different times for practice areas I like, now I'm pretty sure I will do commercial litigation for long term. How can I cure this moving around when applying for a job after my clerkship? You often can't. So you just need to apply to a lot of places. You can't, certain law firms, like the way to fix that, certain law firms are always going to need, have work. And so, but if you go to larger firms where they're going to hold that against you, then you need to find smaller places. So it's just all about the law supply and demand. If you go to some place where they can afford to make they can afford to judge you based on moving, then you're going to have a much harder time there because they have more applicants. But if you go to firms that aren't getting a lot of applicants, then you're going to have a much easier time getting a position. So for those of you that haven't done this with me before, I'll just kind of show you real briefly, like why it's so easy to get a job. No one in the world should ever have a difficult time getting a job. So what is an example? How do you make sure you're always going to find a job? So let's just go here, cities and municipalities in California. I'm just saying California is the largest state. Cities and municipalities in California, so you go here and you see all these different places and you can sort them by size. And so there's going to be thousands of law firms in Los Angeles to do commercial litigation, at least hundreds in San Diego. And so you have all these different cities you can work in, and anything with more than 50,000 people or even 25,000 people is going to have attorneys in those markets that do commercial litigation, which is what you want to do. So just take a random city. I don't even know what the hell that is, but you just say, commercial litigation attorneys, litigation firms. So you have Baker Tilly, you've got Morrison Law. Look at this. This is crazy. Like there's 25,000, attorney market. And so you have all these different people that do commercial litigation just in this small market. Like it's just absolutely insane. And this is just this market. So if I was looking for a job, like why wouldn't I, be applying to all the firms in all these different markets? And then when you get up to these larger markets, let's talk about this, Santa Cruz, Santa Cruz, commercial litigation firms. So here you go here, you've got, Preston, blah, blah, whatever, these firms, it's contract breaches, real estate issues, show more, you have all these firms. Come on, like anybody can get a job. So we've looked at all these municipalities. I don't know how many there are, but there's probably thousands. So there's so many places you can work. Like all you need to do is do searches for these places. And then when you find one of these, you just look at this firm and then, in Santa Cruz, and then you see who's at this firm. Brenton, meet our team. So they have all these attorneys doing commercial litigation. I can guarantee you that Brad Barton is not getting, he does business, civil litigation, business entities. This is just one little town of California and you have thousands. So if I was looking for a commercial litigation position, it's pretty refreshing to know that there might be 10,000 places in California that I could apply to. Come on, anybody that wants a job, it's absolutely insane to think that you can't get a job. Any commercial litigation attorney can get a job. All you need to do is just target a lot of places and apply to them. So let's talk to let's talk to BBC Brenton.law. Like you just go online and you send him your resume and say you want a litigation job. And you do that with thousands of people. I mean, you will get so many jobs, you won't even know what to do with them. You do not need to take a contract job. You do not need to not work in a law firm. You can work in so many different places that it blows my mind that people ever have a hard time getting a job. There's so many places you can get a job. All you need to do is, apply to enough places. Okay, let me just see this last question. Good. What will a firm easily detect that you're interested in working there because of perceived stability instead of something unique to the firm? Yeah, there's nothing wrong with, I guess firms can detect that you're interested in working there because of perceived stability instead of working at a firm. I mean, you need to tell them that that's what you want. If you are going out on a date, you want to tell them you want to get married, like that says stability, or you're trying to find your soulmate, that says stability, but people want to also be seen. So what does that mean? So if you're in a relationship with someone, you want to be seen by that person for who you are. You don't want to be seen, you want to be seen, and everybody wants to be seen. So law firms want to be seen too. Like, do you think they're special? Like, is there something about them, or are you just there for the money, which is very depressing? So everybody wants to be seen. So law firms want to be seen. You want to be seen in a relationship, get in a relationship with someone. You want to be seen for the person you are. If you have a friendship, you want to be seen for the person you are. And if you're not being seen for the person you are, it's very hurtful. Like, people that are like rock stars and things, like, they get very lots of attention, but when people are just seeing them for that many times and they don't feel loved or cared about because they're not seen. So everybody wants to be seen. Law firms want to be seen, you want to be seen. And that's one of the most important rules, of relationships and all sorts of things, that can be important. So thank you for these questions. Harrison, you're an attorney, but chose at some point to become a business person doing this very business. Can you share your own thought on the process for leaving law per se? Yeah, so that's a great question. So it's exactly because of this. So I was working in law firms. And the first law firm I worked at which was Quinn Emanuel, they didn't need people to generate business. They just had so much work. They wanted them to just work there and do all their work forever. I didn't think that was a good long-term career prospect, even though had I become partner there, I would have done very well financially. But I knew that without my own work, thousands of hours of work I would have to do there, that I wouldn't develop business. And not having business, I knew I wouldn't have career stability. Then I went to my next firm. And the next firm was all about making, work, it was a firm where they were letting partners go, where I saw people that have been partners for like 20 years that were getting fired because, they didn't have enough work or whatever. And so I realized had I gone to that firm and stayed at that firm that I didn't have a lot of long-term career stability. So I felt, that I wanted to be somewhere where I had work that was repeating itself. I knew that people were always moving firms. So I knew that was a good option for me for the long term. And I knew that had I were I going to stay in this place, then, were I going to stay someplace for the long term, I would have work that repeats itself. And so, as a business person, like that was my goal, is to have consistent work that were providing long-term income and stability. And that's exactly what I built. I wanted something like that. Would I have done better financially in a law firm and so forth? I don't know. But for me, it was just about having stability. So for me, I thought having a business would give me more long-term repeatable work. I didn't want to be in a situation where I was 20 years in and losing my job for whatever reason. I didn't have enough business. Now, I should have thought about it in terms of, developing a book of business in a law firm and getting repeatable work that way. And I probably would have had a much better result. But at the time, I was seeing associates let go for like kind of, not a Quinn, but at the firm I went to, which was Dewey Valentine, I was seeing a lot of instability there, and that scared me. So I decided, that I wanted to be in a situation where I had, where I felt like I could develop something that repeated itself with a business. Okay, let's see, next question. How can you determine that the firm you're moving to will be better than the one you're leaving? I guess if you're getting more money at a bigger firm with a better reputation, it's a good move, but just not sure when it's better to leave well alone enough and stay put. Yeah, so the danger of large law firms is that you will be let go at a certain point in time if you don't have business generally. I mean, you may not be, but the odds are you will. So that's dangerous. But moving to a better firm will also give you better training and a better resume on your resume will be better. So that's good. And once you're at a big firms hire from other big firms. So that's good. And so it can be a very good move to go to a large law firm. But you have to think about it as, how am I setting myself up for a long-term work? Other things to consider with long-term work is, will that long-term work pay more? So if you go into insurance defense, like that's not paying a lot, but you might have stability. Whereas if you go into commercial litigation, that pays more. And if you are able to get clients doing that, that's going to pay more. So that can help you a lot as well. Okay, well, thank you everybody for being on the webinar. I felt that, I think that people asked really good questions. I hope this was helpful. I think this is a shorter webinar. I'm going to do a resume review workshop either this week or the next. And then I'll send to everybody that was on the webinar, I'll send them an interview sheet that I was showing as well as the slides. And thank you everyone for being here, and I will see you next week.